Hi there. Back on December 6th, George R. R. Martin made a blog post update in which he shared that he'd gone on a 2-week trip to London back in October to meet with the writing staff for House of the Dragon to go over the outlines for the upcoming seasons 3 and 4. And while he was there, they screened for him the rough drafts of the first 2 episodes of season 2, and he really liked them. That's what mainstream news sites focused on, and they glossed over some of the other fine details in there. And I think they let some important stuff slip through the cracks, went under their radar. That Martin mentioned in passing what was actually an important detail that I haven't seen anyone report on for the past month in YouTube channels, in news sites. One or two things on Twitter like Wake the Dragon, Redanian Intelligence have pointed this out in their write-ups. But Martin mentioned in passing who one of the new writers on House of the Dragon Season 2 is going to be. Up to now, we have heard absolutely nothing, other than that we know Condell will be back along with his right-hand executive producer, Sarah Hess. But there were 7 writers on Season 1 for 10 episodes, so who's going to be there? New and returning, and particularly Season 2 is reduced to 8 episodes, and again, I think as they expanded it to 16 and split it in 2, because this is Act 2, all of that. They gave it an extended season order of fewer episodes each. I actually think it's a better idea. Martin mentioned that one of the new writers is Philippa Goslett. I saw no one reporting on this in the past month, so I just want to go over quickly who is Philippa Goslett, because we really need to vet writers. We know painfully well we need to vet every new writer on this. This is what I did back leading up to Season 1. Is this an experienced, qualified person? Yes, going through this, a couple of credits to her name here, that, among other things, back in 2017, she wrote the movie screenplay for this adaptation of a Neil Gaiman short story, How to Talk to Girls at Parties. That movie with Elle Fanning. It was a Neil Gaiman adaptation. She wrote the screenplay for that movie. But more importantly, and most recently, she was the person that HBO picked as the replacement showrunner on The Nevers after Joss Whedon got booted off in Scandal. That even setting aside all the sex assault accusations and stuff, just behind the scenes, he is an awful person. He's this petty tyrant. He really isn't this maverick genius. Well, he's a good screenwriter, but he's constantly arguing with the cast. Just all the revelations that came out from Justice League 2017, 4 years later, about this was all his fault. He completely rewrote a mostly done movie out of vanity. He's a complete egoist. And then all the Buffy people came out and said, this isn't new. He's been like this for 20 years. Bullying the cast, threatening to ruin their careers, yelling at Ray Fisher, Gal Gadot. So HBO was left hanging that we produced 6 episodes out of a 12-episode first season, and we have the other 6 scripts. We at least need to finish it. Obviously, the show has been canceled. They're not going to continue it, but the person they put on damage control for, I'm talking about the physical logistics of running a production like that. Obviously, it's already written already, but was a writer on that, physically in charge of, knowing where things are, versus the problems we have with Benioff and Weiss, that they truly did not know the first thing about filming logistics and production. Philippa Goslett has been a writer on a prominent thing. I've noticed a couple of people who were minor roles on The Nevers appearing in House of the Dragon Season 2. That might just be because it's another HBO project. It might have nothing to do with Goslett. But I don't know if it's like, we know Erica Ford, who is a minor character on The Nevers, has been cast. We don't know as what, and the strong candidate for maybe Sarah Snow. We know she's in the cast, just not as what. That might be coincidence. Maybe they picked her because she's familiar to HBO, not necessarily to Goslett, whatever. Point is, Philippa Goslett is a qualified writer, is apparently high-ranking enough to be in a meeting with George R. R. Martin about this. And this is good news. Now, the bigger issue all this touches on is the gender and race disparity behind the camera in Hollywood. And the big point people miss, and they go, oh, all this wokeness. To me, it's not that it's inherently bad that you have a gender disparity. It's a blatantly visible symptom of a deeper problem of cronyism. It's one of the more obvious symptoms when you have cronyism going on, that Benioff and Weiss hired their personal assistant coffee boy, Brian Cogman, to be a staff writer. He's even joked that you're not supposed to do that. And the thing at Austin Film Fest, where I'm going to link the Austin Film Fest clip at the end of this, where they're boasting to a writers' conference, HBO is pressuring us to hire big-name career professional writers, and we refused. It's ours. But hey, why not hire up our personal assistant? And they're laughing. And for once, this came back to bite. It's just the bubble burst when in the Q&A, people weren't afraid to yell at them. This was September of 2019, finally yelling at them when they say these ridiculous things in public they've been doing for years. Oh, well, we faked our way into it. And someone challenged them. Why didn't you hire any women? That there wasn't a female writer on it after season 3. Wasn't a female director since season 4. By season 7, there wasn't a female cinematographer. It's a blatant sign of cronyism. Like, Downton Abbey was entirely written by Julian Fellows, but he's a white man, but he's doing a good job. Versus when you can see there are visible problems in a show, and there isn't a writing staff. It's not just that it wasn't a diverse writing staff. That's the other big point. It wasn't a writer's room, period. It was them and a couple of their personal assistants, one or two of them. And they intentionally did things to make it look like they made token attempts at that. I remember, I'm upset at myself, back in season 1, I thought, well, there's a woman on the staff, Jane Espenson wrote episode 6. And she later said in interviews, they had no contact with me. They mailed me a few chapters, said turn this into an episode. They had final rewrite on it, of course. I never really interacted with them. But they played that up in season 1, and we have Buffy's Jane Espenson on here. As if there was a meeting, that they weren't having physical meetings. They also played up that George R. R. Martin must assuredly be going over stuff with them because he writes a script. Well, no, they're free to rewrite it, and he later said how little since the pilot they were really interacting with him. So we have to learn to constant vigilance, that they're going to try to spin things with PR. That's what we saw with Game of Thrones, that they put, I can't believe, but then again, I was just some slob in the comment sections back 12 years ago or something, that news sites at the time, who are the people who should have been noticing, it's really weird that you made your personal assistant a writer, but you don't have, other professional writers on this, a full writing staff. That is not normal for a show of this scale. Because HBO used up 20 years of goodwill doing that. Oh, well, it's so bold that we put these two unknowns in charge because they're morons, but no, they're a diamond in the rough. It's people like, well, HBO is the place that made Sopranos, they must know what they're doing. Even through 2017, people would say, well, they used up 20 years of goodwill, versus in the lead up to House of the Dragon, where there's an entirely new set of people in charge at HBO after Discovery bought them, after AT&T, and people go, I'm never going to trust HBO again. Well, I'm not going to trust the specific people who were in charge at the time, but they have new people in charge now, and at the executive level, much less the new showrunners. So, all of this, and I'm going to keep this short, but note that I'm making this Friday, January 5th, the weekend of the Golden Globes, which are a weekend before the Emmys, because the Emmys got delayed because of the strike. And actually tomorrow are the Creative Arts Emmys, where some of the House of the Dragon people are up, like cinematographer Catherine Goldschmidt, who worked on episode 8, might be the first woman to ever win Best Cinematographer. And this will be part of the discussion, that gender disparity, race disparity behind the scenes, when you see so few of those actually in the categories nominated for such things. And again, I'm not yelling on general principle, it's a symptom of the cronyism. And you know what was another symptom of the cronyism? When they didn't physically have a writer's room. A book I really liked reading over Christmas break, which I'm going to talk about a lot more, I've talked about it before on my channel, is this great book by Maureen Ryan, Burn It Down, from this past summer, talking about the problems she saw in Hollywood for the past decade that led to the strike. And I made a video about the Lost chapter, and among other things, it's just frightening how she doesn't even talk about Game of Thrones, because she's talking about the shows she was covering. And Benioff and Weiss were the worst example of a wider problem of, basically, after the Writers Guild lost the last strike in 2008, all of the studios went nuts that we are invincible, we beat the writers, we can do anything. Even though the strike was about, you need to start planning for when the streaming boom happens. And Netflix had just started, Hulu had just started, and rather than plan their own streaming platforms, they just said, no, we don't need to make our own stream. I remember that no, streaming is a fad, and they weren't planning and like kicking and screaming even as late as like 2017, and then they scrambled to make like, we need to make HBO Max. They really were not planning for we need to do that. From 2008 to 2018, there's like this 10-year period where it was like this gilded age in the literal sense. It's a criticism of it's the gold-plated but not actual gold, where they were pretending they were more successful than they actually were. They thought they were making so much money. They thought they were geniuses. The heads of the studios like Richard Plepler at HBO, and they thought they were so invincible after beating the writers in the last strike that they would cut corners everywhere, that they stopped paying for writer training. This was the big thing of this strike, wasn't AI. That was just the soundbite. It's you don't pay to train writers anymore in production. And increasingly, they would not have writers' rooms. George R. Martin himself talked about this in his blog. He said that he explained this pretty thoroughly, that they'd have mini rooms, or they just hire 2 to 3 people, and it's like, why is this a term? It's you cheap bastard. You didn't hire up a full writing staff for your TV show and just said, oh, one person is capable of doing all this work with no training. Because writers cost money and training costs money, and then you'll wonder why they keep churning out so much crap. This was a widespread problem. Benioff and Weiss were probably the worst example of many, because they once were held up at the Emmy Awards and stuff as this big name thing, but this was all over the place. And the system is still broken. I hope the strike is going to right the ship. But the context that allowed them to thrive, that the broken industry, the broken system that allowed that to happen, where it's not just about the diversity, but it's the rampant cronyism. But that'll be a bigger thing going forward. Think about that when you're watching the award shows this week. But the other point I made was that we only have 8 episodes in season 2. So when you go, oh no, the number of female writers has been reduced from 3 to 2. Well, because there's fewer episodes, go by ratio, obviously. That season 1, we had 2 episodes from Sarah Hess, and one by Charmaine Degrette, and one by Eileen Shim. She wrote episode 8. And that's 4 out of 10, but there's 7 writers, so 3 out of 7 were women. But if you count Ty Mickle, who's Martin's representative, as the 8th writer, technically it was half and half. Half was also non-white, 3 Asian, Charmaine is Louisiana Creole black. So I made videos about this, that no, this was a very more or less equal parity. Parity, not parody. Gender parity, all that other stuff was good in season 1. But the bigger thing I'm worried about is I don't want Ryan Condal to suddenly shift to writing 4 out of 8 episodes. Because Game of Thrones gave the appearance that this was a staff of writers at first, and only later did I realize there isn't a formal writing room. That there isn't a formal staff, and the 1 or 2 people I'm fascinated by, like Vanessa Taylor was the token woman they had technically on staff in seasons 2 and 3, who the more I read sounds like they just mailed her do this chapter, much as they did Jane Espenson in season 1. I'm not sure. But I think what they did is have 4 writers and divide up 8 episodes to each. The wider context of this is that we know of 4 writers in total. Philippa Goslett is the 4th one. First and second are, of course, Ryan Condal and Sarah Hess. But we found out about the 3rd one, who's a kind of new writer, a couple of weeks ago, David Hancock. And I say kind of new because it turns out he was a script continuity guy on House of the Dragon Season 1. So he was working with the writing staff, but this is the first time he's being credited with scripts for a full episode. He has experience. He was a continuity editor, reviewing the scripts back on The Crown before this, Matt Smith's old show. So we have David Hancock and now Philippa Goslett. That means we have 2 female writers, 2 male writers. That's roughly a half and half ratio. More again if you count Ty Mickle as the fifth writer. But when we saw that David Hancock's agency website had been updated to say he's credited as a writer on House of the Dragon, now a full writer, it said he was credited for 2 episodes. And if he is a new writer, it stands to reason that if he has as many as 2, everyone else probably has 2. Like, if Sarah Hess had 2, I might be thinking maybe Ryan Condal will do 3. And then again, that we thought the directors would work out like that, but it turned out for 8 episodes. Actually, no, three directors were doing 3 episodes each, and then there were 2 directors who did 1 apiece. So there might be 5 in all or something. There might be another writer we haven't heard of yet. If maybe Philippa Goslett's doing 1 episode, there might be another writer who does 1, but that is increasingly unlikely. That Hancock got 2, and these are the people that Martin mentioned by name. In his blog post, he said, I met with Condal, Hess, Hancock, Goslett, and Mickle. This is the writing staff. I don't think there's if there is another writer, it's a minor writer somewhere that, mailed in as good, like the one-shot writers from season 1. But I think this is what we're looking at as the writing staff. These 4 credited people plus Ty Mickle, and that they're doing 2 episodes each. So it's still, for an 8-episode thing, 4 to 5 writers is a writer's room, not a mini room. There is discussion going on here. It's not Ryan Condal dominating everything by doing 6 out of 8 episodes. I don't think you should be writing 3 full episodes, because that's really hard. It divides your attention. Benioff and Weiss acted like we're these superstar prodigies capable of writing, we're a writing duo, we can handle 7 episodes a season, and you can't. The writing went to shit. There were problems even early on. There's just no other major show, look around, has the showrunner, even an 8-episode thing, writing like half of the episodes. That is physically implausible. And they sold us on that bullshit for so long. So it ties into all these elements about the strike. I think that the gender ratios are part of the cronyism, and we don't need writing staffs that led to the strike. And I'm going to be keeping track of what is the composition of the writer's room going forward on this on season 2, because this is probably the most important crew position. We were tracking the directors before this, and they're pretty much even now. 4 and 4 out of 8 are, women, with Claire Kilner and Geeta Patel returning. But the most important thing are the writers. Look at Game of Thrones, where they had these top industry people in the props, in the music, in the costuming, all of these top-level effects and all these other things, and center of it all was, we don't have a writing staff, we just put these 2 frat boys in charge. The most important part are the brains, are the writers. So I'll be tracking this going forward, and it is a question. Well, there's fewer, sometimes people just leave. What is the composition going to be there? Because we haven't had interviews with every single writer. Not all of them have, done magazine things and talked about what the writing process was going into this. I will be keeping on top of this. Please stick around.